For the third time in the past week, Shane Beamer and the South Carolina Gamecocks have landed a commitment on the recruiting trail. This one kickstarting the 2026 class with quarterback Landon Duckworth.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome to the special commitment reaction edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your team every single day. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. You can find my written work over on Gamecocks Digest on SI.com. Thank you once again for tuning in to this special live commitment reaction show. We are free and available both on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. South Carolina has their quarterback, not for the 2025 class, but for the 2026 class. You heard me correctly. South Carolina just got their first 2026 commit in quarterback Landon Duckworth out of the state of Alabama. And with Landon Duckworth's commitment, Dowell Loggains, he is getting a young gunslinger that has a very high ceiling. We're going to talk about just how high that ceiling might be in just a couple moments. But first, a quick summary of how this recruitment unfolded. Landon Duckworth just received an offer from South Carolina a little over 2 months ago now, back on May the 27th of this year. He has taken 2 unofficial visits to South Carolina to this point. He took one back on April 15th for the Garnet Black Spring game, and he took another one this past weekend for South Carolina's annual summer cookout event. And it was at this event, based on what Landon Duckworth told me a little while back, that he committed to Shane Beamer and Dowell Loggains in person. And that commitment was made over teams like the Florida Gators, the Texas A&M Aggies, Arkansas Razorbacks, Mississippi State Bulldogs, and plenty of others as well. Some big-time SEC programs that threw their hat in the ring. But there's something about his relationship with Dowell Loggains and what South Carolina's got going on right now. Landon Duckworth, at least for the time being, it seems like that he wants to be a part of that. So what makes Landon Duckworth such a promising prospect for the Gamecocks in this 2026 class? Well, when looking at some of his highlights from his freshman season at Jackson High School, athletically speaking, Landon Duckworth is a dual-threat quarterback that has an absolute cannon of an arm for a kid that's just 15 or 16 years old. This is a kid that at one point in his freshman highlight reel, he threw the football 57 yards down the field off platform, meaning that he was not fully planted on both feet. That is just absolutely bonkers arm strength right there, again, for a kid that just completed his freshman season of high school football. He can throw deep passes also down the field that don't look like they're there based on the coverage of the defensive secondary. He can basically take the top off of a defense without the receiver having to get behind both safeties on the back end. Again, you can maybe point to the fact that that is because of the high school talent he might be facing, just how much better he is than some of his competition possibly. But nonetheless, that is still very impressive for Landon Duckworth. In terms of his running ability, he's got great ball carrier vision when he does take the football on design running plays. His high school, Jackson High School, doesn't seem to utilize him on too many of those to try to protect him, which is quite smart of his coaching staff. But either way, when he is utilized in the run game, he does a very good job of seeing the field and finding the hole that he needs to hit. And while Duckworth is not necessarily a burner, he does have decent speed and enough of a subtle wiggle to his game to where he can get himself out of trouble when the pocket does indeed collapse. Now, from a position-specific standpoint, Landon Duckworth, he does not always throw the football from a stable base when he has the space to do so. What I mean by that is sometimes Landon Duckworth sort of creates his own off-platform throws when he doesn't really have to, when the pressure is not necessarily right there on top of him. And that can get him into some trouble at times because a throw like that can take the velocity off of his pass, or it could cause him to change his arm angle and thus change the accuracy of his throw as well, which puts the ball up more so in harm's way than it would otherwise. He also at times, admittedly, can rely on that arm talent, that arm strength he has a little bit too much, especially in situations where at the college level, it probably isn't going to work out in his favor. But again, this is the high school ranks, and when you do watch his highlights, again, it is very clear that pretty much every time Landon Duckworth is out there on the football field, he is likely the best player that is competing in the game. So you can kind of understand why he does that. Again, he just completed his freshman season, so I'm not trying to dock him for that. Landon Duckworth is going to have plenty of time to try to correct that over the next couple of years, but nonetheless, it is something that he does need to try to work on before he gets to the next level. I will say, one thing that really impresses me about Landon Duckworth's game already, considering how young he is, he throws the football extremely well outside the numbers. And outside the number throws, that's a type of throw that a lot of quarterbacks struggle with, especially quarterbacks that, again, are just starting out their high school football career. But yet when you see some of these throws outside the numbers that Landon Duckworth makes, it's pretty clear that it's something that comes kind of seamless to him, despite the fact that, again, he just started playing at the high school level. So that's something that's really encouraging to see for a guy that could very well be playing Power 5 and SEC level football once he ends up getting to college. The last thing that I note about Landon Duckworth, when he does run with the football, he is not totally afraid of having some contact dealt his way from an opposing defender. That's certainly something that will get the respect of his teammates and his coaches alike. So now my overall thoughts on Landon Duckworth's game. He has raw arm strength that might rank right at the top or near the top of the 2026 recruiting class. And Landon Duckworth, he has the ability to hit the home run ball every time he throws the football down the field. And considering the fact that, again, he's just about to start his sophomore campaign in high school, he's got a ton of time to improve all the areas that I mentioned just a minute or two ago. But bottom line, right now, based on his offers and based on what he's already done at Jackson High School in Jackson, Alabama, this kid is a national level prospect, and he is just scratching the surface in terms of the potential that he possesses. He has plenty of room to grow, and the fact that South Carolina has gotten him early on in the process is really good for the Gamecocks. Let's think about this in an optimistic way. If Landon Duckworth does stick it out with the Gamecocks, he stays solid with his commitment, then the Gamecocks potentially have another recruiter on their hands. Maybe another guy like Dante Reno and what all he's done for South Carolina in the 2023 and 2024 classes. Now, granted, Dante Reno, it's a bit of a different situation being a coach's son. Once he kind of committed, Gamecock fans, I think, could tell this is someone that they didn't have to worry about wavering when it came to his pledge. But Landon Duckworth, he could be that same kind of player recruiter for this 2026 class if he sticks with South Carolina. And I'm willing to admit, it is a long ways away from signing day. Usually, those comments kind of get to me a little bit because I kind of view that to be an eternal pessimistic outlook, quite frankly, from a fan standpoint, when people say that all the time. But for a kid like Landon Duckworth, if you're hesitant to celebrate because of how long it will be before he has to sign the dotted line, I totally understand it in this case. This is certainly a kid to watch moving forward. It'll be interesting to see how he progresses on the field. It'll be interesting to see how he grows. And it'll certainly be interesting to see how many more teams go after him. Obviously, high school football recruiting, it can be an absolute war between these college coaching staffs. So, no question, these other teams are probably not going to slow down recruiting Landon Duckworth, especially teams that maybe as time moves on, they don't have a certain quarterback prospect in their class. Or maybe they don't have a good enough quarterback prospect left on their board. Maybe they try to ump the ante. What if Alabama and Auburn really push hard here? That is something that admittedly you do have to acknowledge in this case. But for right now, Gamecock fans, you got good reason to celebrate here because, again, Landon Duckworth committing this early, it could do wonders for you in the 2026 class. And it also indicates that kids a few years down the road already feel like that this program has got a certain long-term stability about it right now. And that's something that Shane Beamer and Dowell Loggains can now use and tout on the recruiting trail. And they can use Landon Duckworth as a perfect example to convey that to these other targets. But with that being said, that does it for this special commitment reaction edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. Thank y'all so much for tuning in as always. What are your thoughts on this commitment? What are your thoughts on Landon Duckworth's game overall? Let me know down below in the comments section if you watch this on YouTube, or shoot me a direct message on Twitter at @aline_SC. If you listen to this on an audio podcast app, whether it's Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, you name it. Otherwise, thank you once again for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Friday evening and a fantastic weekend. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to catch y'all once again really soon right here on the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.